child taken from her home in Gallup in the late 1980s. Anchor Sasha Linenger spoke to the sister of Antoinette Calladito about
Police are still trying to piece together exactly what happened. Fox 9's Iris Perez is here with the last known message from the man. Iris, this message, hard to listen to.
On April 6, 1986, 9-year-old Antoinette Calladito was kidnapped from her home in Gallup, New Mexico, whilst her mother and sister slept. Despite extensive searches, Antoinette was never found. But 1 year after she disappeared, Gallup Police Station received a panic call for help from someone claiming to be Antoinette. The call was unable to be traced, but it begs the question, could Antoinette still be alive to this day? Born on Christmas Day, 1976, to Penny Calladito and Anthony Montoya Antoinette, was part of a long line of proud Navajo women alongside two sisters, Wendy and Sadie. After Penny and Anthony split shortly after Antoinette was born, Penny and the three girls settled in the quiet community of Gallup. Growing up, Antoinette was wise beyond her years, helping around the house with cooking, cleaning, and ironing, and seeing herself as a caregiver to the family. Even at just 6 years old, Antoinette went to Lincoln Elementary School and excelled in most subjects. She had a reading age far beyond her own, loved sports and gym, and was devoted to her Bible studies. At home, after her chores were done, Antoinette would listen to music, her favorite artist being Michael Jackson. On April 6, 1986, when Antoinette was 9 years old, her mother had gone out drinking at a bar with a couple of friends and left a babysitter in charge of her three young children. Shortly after midnight, Penny returned and sent the babysitter home. Extremely drunk, Penny went to bed, wrongfully assuming her children were sleeping soundly till morning in the next room. At around 3 a.m., there was a sharp knock at the door. Startled awake, Antoinette and Wendy looked around at each other, confused before Antoinette, being the older of the girls, got up to see who it was. Wendy heard Antoinette as she walked over to the door, asking, "Who's this?" and heard her reply back with a man's voice saying it was Uncle Joe. Now, the girls did have an Uncle Joe, but this man wasn't him. The next thing Wendy heard was Antoinette shouting, "Let me go! Let me go!" and was dragged out of the house the second she opened the door for Uncle Joe. Terrified, Wendy went back to sleep, hoping the last few minutes had just been a terrible nightmare. No one else in the home heard anything. The next day, shortly after 7 a.m., Penny was up and went to wake her children. It was then that she discovered her 9-year-old daughter had disappeared. Panicked, Penny spent the next 4 hours calling out for Antoinette, searching the neighborhood for her, hoping she had just sleepwalked and hadn't gone far. But it was no use. She had simply vanished. At 11 a.m., she called the police to report her daughter missing, only for the police to tell her she needed to wait 8 hours to report Antoinette missing. So when the police eventually started searching for the missing 9-year-old, they were hours behind. Made it worse when Wendy revealed to them and her mother what she had heard the night before. This wasn't a runaway. Antoinette had been kidnapped, and she could be anywhere by now. The search was scaled up, and the community surrounding areas and foothills were all searched, but nothing was found. Police speculated that Antoinette had been driven from the scene, but that was all they could theorize. Days turned into weeks and months, and Penny was searching daily for her missing child, losing all hope of ever being reunited. But 1 year after Antoinette disappeared, hope at last came in the form of a panicked phone call coming into Gallup Police Station.
I'm Antoinette Calladito.
Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque? Hello? Antoinette, where are you?
On the call, a girl's voice claiming to be Antoinette told the call handler that she was being held in Albuquerque. Before the call handler could even speak, a male's voice is heard shouting, "Who told you you could use the phone?" Screams are heard and the line goes dead. Detectives played the call for Penny, who confirmed the girl was her daughter, but she still was unable to identify the voice of the male. But the call gave them one thing: hope. Hope that she was still alive. Police continued searching, but Antoinette possibly being held in Albuquerque, it was like a needle in a haystack, and leads quickly dried up once more. 5 years after the phone call was made in 1991, a waitress in Carson City, Nevada, reported that she had served what looked to be a scruffy-looking couple with a teenage girl matching Antoinette's description. The waitress reported that at one point, the girl grabbed her hand and squeezed it, desperate to get her attention. When the three left, the waitress went over to the table and found napkins with messages inside saying, "Call the police," and "Help me." But by the time she had read the messages, it was too late. They had gone. And that is where the case ends. Antoinette Cayedito was never found. Authorities suspect that she died sometime after the phone call was made, punished for seeking help. Authorities also believe that Penny, who died in 1999, never knowing what happened to her daughter, may have had something to do with her disappearance. Antoinette, who would be 45 if alive today, has moles on her right cheek, nose, ankle, and back. She also has scars on her knee and lip. She has dark hair and dark eyes. If you believe you have information related to the disappearance of Antoinette Cayedito, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. In the early hours of September 7, 2015, 32-year-old Henry McCabe made a series of chilling phone calls and voicemails to his wife, Corrine, after a heavy night of drinking with his friends. Dropped off at a gas station with no keys, what happened to Henry that night remains a mystery. All we know is that when his body was found 2 months later, we were left with more questions than answers, and no chance of closure. What happened to Henry McCabe? 32-year-old Henry McCabe lived in the town of Mounds View, Minnesota with his wife, Corrine, who was his childhood sweetheart, and 2 children. Working as an auditor for the Minnesota Department of Revenue, Henry had plans to leave his role and relocate his family back to California after struggling financially and receiving bad reviews at work. On Labor Day weekend 2015, Corrine and her 2 children had gone to California to finalize the move whilst Henry stayed in Minnesota, planning one last big night out with his friends. And so, on September 6, 2015, Henry was joined by friends Calvin Johnson and William Kennedy. The 3 went to a bar called Pavlitsky's at Spring Lake Park and drank late into the night, reminiscing about times shared and talking about Henry's upcoming move. As they had started thinking about leaving, Calvin and William decided to confiscate Henry's wallet and keys as he had been making threats to drive drunk and attempt to pick up more alcohol. At around 1:30 a.m., Henry got into William's car, with William agreeing to drive him the 2-mile distance to his home from the bar. However, during the car ride, Henry asked William if he wouldn't mind dropping him off at the Super America petrol station instead. The petrol station's 6 minutes away from his home. At 2:28 a.m., Henry called Corrine by accident. When she answered the call, she heard Henry screaming, growling, and making inhuman, almost animalistic noises. Panicked, she called his brother, Tim Borber, and left him a voicemail with what she could hear from Henry. During the call, Corrine claims she heard a male voice saying, "Stop it," at which point the line dropped. Corrine tried calling Henry back straight away, but he didn't pick up. It was the last time he was ever heard from again. The next day, when Tim woke up and heard the voicemail left by Corrine, he instantly knew something was wrong and contacted the police, reporting his brother missing. Police searched the area and spoke to William and Calvin in order to find out what Henry's last known movements were. The pair recounted the events of the previous night and told police how they had confiscated Henry's keys and wallet. Suspicions were raised when the police followed up with the gas station William had told them he had dropped Henry off at. The gas station had surveillance footage, but nothing that showed William or Henry ever being there that night. When police put this to William, he realized his mistake and told them he had actually dropped Henry off at a different gas station 3 miles away. Police looked into Henry's phone records and saw that it last pinged 5 miles away from Mounds View in New Brighton and decided to widen the search area. Multiple organized searches were made over the next 2 months, and Henry's disappearance and the strange last phone call were kept fresh in the minds of the public. During this time, controversy hit when a $10,000 reward offered for information in the case was pulled when Minnesota Community Police released a statement saying that Kareen had been withholding information and purposefully misleading the police. A month later, on November 2, 2015, a kayaker finds Henry's remains in Rush Lake, 5 miles away from where he had last been seen alive. Despite the call Henry made screaming in pain, the coroner found no evidence of trauma or injury on his body and ruled that he had drowned accidentally. But is the answer really that simple? Well, no. According to some reports, the FBI quickly became involved in the case. Were the noises made on the call even made by Henry? Were they even human? It's not common for a 3-letter agency to get involved in your usual run-of-the-mill drowning, unless it isn't. But let's explore some other theories. The biggest theory in this case is that Henry had taken drugs whilst out with his friends and was experiencing a bad trip alongside the nauseating effects of alcohol. In his confused state, dropped miles from home, Henry attempted to make his own way back but got lost and began to see things that weren't there. Desperate for help, he rang Kareen, who could only listen as he battled with entities that just weren't there. But that doesn't explain the sounds. Another theory is that Henry was killed by his friends. Police were initially suspicious when William changed his story, even more so when it was revealed that the two had confiscated his keys and wallet before dropping him off miles from home. Was Henry left alone by the lake, or was someone with him? And lastly, some believe that Henry was killed in a murder-for-hire plot, set up by his own wife. With the oddity surrounding the reward money, Kareen allegedly withholding information, and the fact that she had a perfect alibi states away, people had suggested in recent years that she was the mastermind behind Henry's death. Could Kareen have wanted to start fresh in California without her husband? Some believe that the phone call she received was nothing more than a hitman calling her to provide proof of a job done. Whatever happened to Henry, all that we are left with is the strange voicemail and an open investigation as to what really happened that Labor Day weekend. Just a day after spending Christmas with her family, on December 26, 1985, 28-year-old Deborah Wolf vanished from her Fayetteville home she shared with her 2 dogs. 6 days later, her body was found inside a barrel at the bottom of a pond on the property. With ill-fitting clothes, cans of alcohol not belonging to Debbie, and a mysterious voicemail left for her on the day she vanished, her family was appalled when her death was ruled accidental. What really happened that day? Has a killer been allowed to walk free for the last 37 years? Born on June 19, 1957, 28-year-old Debbie Wolf lived by herself in a cabin with her 2 dogs, Morgan and Mason. Debbie adored her dogs and, despite her long shifts as a nurse, always made sure the pair were exercised daily. Debbie worked at the Fayetteville Veterans Hospital in North Carolina. With it being a holiday season, Debbie had 1 day off for Christmas to spend with her family before she was back at work the next day, finishing at 4 p.m. and heading home. The next day, when Debbie failed to turn up for her shift, alarm bells immediately began ringing. Debbie was always on time, always picking up shifts when necessary, and if she's ever needed to take a sick day, she'd make sure someone knew. And so Debbie's supervisor called Jenny Edwards, Debbie's mother, to find out what was going on. Jenny called around family and friends, but nobody had heard from her since the day before. Jenny called one of Debbie's closest friends, Kevin Gorton, and asked him to go check up on her, as he lived closest. Going over to Debbie's house, hoping she had simply overslept, Kevin was shocked to find her quiet cabin in complete disarray. Her work uniform had been hastily thrown on the ground. There were beer cans all over the floor, and worst of all, her dogs were outside her house without food. Kevin could tell that something wasn't right from this alone. Debbie adored those dogs and would never leave them in that state. Kevin also noticed that her purse wasn't where it usually lay. After looking around the cabin, he found it hidden beneath a mattress, almost like she had attempted to hide it. When Kevin, who was preparing to leave the cabin, checked the answering machine in search of any information regarding Debbie's whereabouts, things only grew stranger. A voicemail had been left by a man who said he was checking up on Debbie in the message, stating that she has missed a few days of work and that she was unsure of her well-being. But Debbie hadn't missed a couple of days. She had missed 1. Why was someone suggesting that Debbie had missed numerous days of work when she had only missed 1 day of work up to that time, and that day was still in progress?
Hey, Deb, missed you here at work today. Just wondering how you doing. If you're able to give me a call up here at the ward, I'm at day 2.
Armed with the strange voicemail, the disarray of her cabin, and the absence of Debbie, the police were called and a search was launched. Police searched the cabin and surrounding areas but found nothing that would suggest where she had gone. A small pond on her property was quickly ruled out by police, and they suggested she may have left on her own accord. Jenny and Debbie's friends and other relatives pleaded with the police to investigate the area and the pond more thoroughly, but were refused. Desperate, the family enlisted the help of Gordon Childress, a friend of Kevin's, and the pair dived into the pond to search for any clues. Both Kevin and Gordon had the experience of search and rescue operations, and within 5 minutes, they had a hit. 2 sets of footprints were found in the pond, and marks that suggested one of the pair had been dragged against her will. There had been a struggle. Then they noticed a foot, Debbie's foot. Her body had been stuffed carelessly inside a rusted 55-gallon oil barrel. Her body had been half pulled out of the barrel by the water. The police were called back to the scene and Debbie's body was taken for an autopsy. The results of the autopsy concluded that despite all the beer cans scattered throughout her home, no drugs or alcohol were found in her system. Her cause of death was listed as being undetermined but probable drowning. The autopsy noted possible defense injuries to her hands as well as the fact none of the clothes Debbie had been found in belonged to her. In fact, the last outfit she had been seen wearing was never found. Despite all of this, detectives ruled her death accidental and said that Debbie died after falling into the pond while playing with her dogs. But that didn't explain the voicemail, the clothes, or anything. And the barrel she was found in? Police claimed it never existed. Instead, they said that what Kevin and Gordon saw was a jacket, ballooned up by the water. But they know what they saw. Kevin also knows what people who have drowned look like. He came out and said that as drowning is a slow way to die, a person would fight until their last breath, and that fight would be etched upon their face, even after dying. Eyes wide, mouth open. But Debbie didn't. Debbie looked peaceful, almost like she was sleeping. Kevin remembered the dual footprints and the drag marks and believed that Debbie was killed before being placed in the lake. Anyone that knew Debbie firmly believed she had been murdered, and their suspect was whoever left that voicemail. The man seemed to know Debbie, and the fact that he knew Debbie was missing and that she would stay missing before her family even did, make them believe he had something to do with her death. Debbie's family believed the voicemail was used to cover his tracks and begged the police to take another look at it. Instead, the police told them they had already interviewed the man who supposedly made the voicemail, and he provided an alibi. Once more, the man had fled the state days after being cleared by the police and never came back. Losing all trust in the detectives, the family began their own investigation and found that a volunteer Debbie worked with at the hospital had become obsessed with her. The man would frequently tell Debbie he was in love with her and suggest they go out, with Debbie politely declining him each and every time. Hospital workers told her family that he seemed to get more aggressive with his affection for Debbie upon each rejection. Was he the mystery man who left that voicemail? Was this a case of if he can't have her, no one can? To this day, the suspicious death of Debbie Wolfe remains a mystery.